We live together but we aren't close. In fact, we're strangers who just happen to share a house. It came out at the dinner table, the way things always do in my family. Suddenly, and a little too late. My dad slammed his fork down and said he couldn't take it anymore. He said that, based on his observations, I hadn't gone to school in 6 months, and that he was tired of pretending not to notice. I looked at him and reminded him, calmly, that I graduated 3 years ago. My mom immediately turned to my brother and snapped that if I was already done with school, why was he still leaving the house every morning? My brother quietly put down his utensils and told her he worked there. As a teacher. My mom laughed awkwardly and then turned on my dad, asking if there was someone else since he went out every night. My dad didn't react. He asked if working the night shift was suddenly an unacceptable answer. Then he looked straight at her and asked whether she had ever actually cared about any of us. No one answered. My mom's name is Linda. My dad's name is David. My brother is Alex. My name is Emily. We stared at each other in silence, then went back to eating like nothing had happened. A friend once told me she'd seen plenty of dysfunctional families, but she'd never seen a family that felt like a group of strangers renting rooms from each other. That's exactly what we are. We don't know each other's schedules, worries, or secrets. I didn't even know what my brother really did for a living until the day I got bullied, and he showed up to deal with it. That was when I learned Alex wasn't just a teacher, was a professor at a magic academy. Soon after that, the rest came out. My dad is a vampire. My mom is an alien. And somehow, I'm the only normal human in the entire household. After that incident, I overheard them say something that stuck with me: anyone who bullies Emily must be humanely eliminated. That was when I started to realize the world I thought I knew wasn't as ordinary as I believed. Not long after, my best friend Megan and I ran into proof of that in the worst possible place, an alley behind a convenience store. Standing in front of us was a snakeman. Not a nickname. Not a costume. A real half-man, half-snake creature, sweating and twitching because he was apparently in heat. Megan and I exchanged a look and silently agreed neither of us wanted to be involved in whatever he had going on. After a brief discussion, we decided the most humane solution was to neuter him. I asked Megan if she had any experience. She said she once had her cat fixed without anesthesia, and described it so vividly I regretted asking. I looked at the snakeman and asked if he thought he could handle that. He shook his head so hard I thought it might fall off. Megan misunderstood and said it wasn't about whether he could handle it, it was for his own good. The snakeman panicked and yelled that it wasn't the anesthesia he was afraid of, it was the neutering itself. He tried to explain that he wasn't a cat. He didn't howl or destroy furniture. He just slithered around and danced. He asked us to move aside so someone who actually wanted to help could step in. I pointed out that his appearance might scare people. Megan added that if anyone else found him, they'd probably send him off to be dissected for research. That's when I wondered out loud whether snake meat tasted better fried or boiled. Megan seriously considered it. We both turned to look at him. He started shaking and muttering about how terrifying humans were. Then took off running. He ran straight into my brother. Alex stood at the mouth of the alley, calm and unimpressed, like this was just another inconvenience. He looked at me and asked if this was really my taste in men. I ignored him and asked why he wasn't in class. He said it was Sunday. Megan whispered that she hadn't seen him in forever, and I admitted I hadn't either, even though we lived in the same house. Alex glanced between us and the snakeman and said girls should have more self-respect. I quickly explained this wasn't some strange gathering and told him about our neutering plan. The snakeman looked at Alex like he was staring at a judge. Alex said neutering him would be cruel. I argued that letting him suffer was worse. The snakeman begged. Finally, Alex sighed and said he'd take care of it. I stared at him and asked if he was both skinny and gay. Megan was already smiling like she was imagining something inappropriate. Alex's expression darkened. He explained that he was taking the snakeman to mate with a nest of giant pythons he kept in the Amazon. The snakeman screamed that he hated snakes. I smiled and said that clearly meant he wanted to be neutered. In the end, he followed Alex away, voluntarily or not. Megan looked disappointed. I wasn't sure if she was sad she didn't get to perform surgery, or if she just wanted a better story. To make it up to her, I bought her ice cream. We sat on the curb with our cheap cones and talked about the future. I told her one day I'd buy the whole street, and turn every shop into a milk tea place. She asked for one store and said she wanted to open a neutering clinic. I asked if she meant a pet shop. She said no, very seriously, and added that if I ever didn't want kids, she'd help me for free. I told her I'd pass the offer along to my brother. Somehow, Alex heard about it. When I got home, he was standing in the living room waiting for me, arms crossed, staring like I'd just committed a crime against science. Without raising his voice, he asked if I was actively looking for a quicker way to die. I laughed because obviously he was joking. Probably. I asked him where he'd taken the snakeman. He said the snakeman was already on a plane headed for a tropical rainforest, and that if I missed him, he'd be happy to send me there too so I could experience wilderness survival firsthand. I tried to sneak past him, but he grabbed my collar and reminded me I still hadn't explained the neutering thing. I blinked and started explaining what sterilization meant, very slowly and very politely, like I was reading from a pamphlet. He stared at me and asked if I seriously thought he needed a biology lesson. I raised my hand and asked if I could say one last thing. When he nodded, I took a deep breath and yelled for Mom, accusing him of trying to end the family bloodline. Alex panicked instantly and slapped a hand over my mouth, demanding to know if I'd lost my mind. When he finally let go, I told him that if he didn't release me immediately, I'd make sure we both went down together. His eyelid twitched, but he let go and told me to go play somewhere else. Downstairs, Mom was in the kitchen cooking while watching short videos on her phone. She's been really into those lately. She says the app gives her digital coins, which sounds fake, but she seems happy. After a while, she asked if I'd just called her. I told her not to worry about it. If she reacted any slower, I'd already be ashes in a box. She nodded thoughtfully and told me my dad's friends were coming over later, so I should clean the table. As I wiped things down, I realized something alarming. I had absolutely no idea what my dad actually did for work. Right on cue, our dog Buddy sprinted to the door and opened it like he paid the mortgage. The first guest was a foreigner. I paused. Did my dad work for an international company? Then someone dressed like a witch walked in. I decided it must be a themed party. Then a famous movie star stepped inside. A real one. The kind who walks red carpets. I walked up to him and asked if he was also my dad's friend. He smiled and said he was actually my dad's fan. At that point, I panicked in a very quiet, internal way. I ran to the basement, where Dad usually sleeps, and yelled that his friends were here. I flipped on the light and sent a group of bats flying in every direction. Dad opened his eyes, and for half a second they glowed red. I immediately ordered eye drops on my phone. His pink eye acts up a lot. At dinner, I sat on the side and listened. Alex had vanished again, which honestly tracks. One guest casually mentioned the last time he'd seen my dad was during the Crusades. Dad coughed and told me they were friends from a game he played. That explanation somehow answered everything and nothing at the same time. I didn't understand most of their conversation, but it sounded intense and historical. Mom watched quietly, then told Dad he was on dish duty after everyone left. I got an autograph from the movie star and posted it online. Megan liked it immediately. My boss commented that it was obviously fake, and that I was clout chasing. Dad set down his bowl, said he had to go to work, and left. I checked the time. Starting work after 11 at night seemed normal for him. The next morning, my boss's comment had vanished. When I got to work, there was a handwritten apology letter waiting on my desk. A full page. Emotional. Thoughtful. Honestly beautiful. I didn't even know my boss could write like that without me editing his emails. I was so touched that I decided to agree to his earlier suggestion to cut my performance bonus. Being a manager is hard. I wanted to be understanding. I knocked on his door. My boss, Mr. Grant, peeked out like he was expecting disaster. He asked if I was too cold, too hot, hungry, thirsty, or emotionally distressed. I told him he should cut my bonus. His knees nearly gave out. He yelled that I was trying to kill him, and announced he was giving up his own bonus so everyone else could get the maximum. I walked out feeling like a terrible person for ever thinking badly of him. A coworker asked if my bonus had been cut. I said no, everyone was getting the maximum. He asked if the sun had risen in the west. I explained our boss was sacrificing his own pay. He stared at me and asked if aliens had invaded, and no one bothered to tell him. I silently promised to work harder from now on. That night, I told Mom about the bonus drama, and asked if she thought I could help my boss more. She pushed up her glasses and said of course I could. Then she got excited because she could withdraw more money from her app. The next morning, the general manager wouldn't make eye contact with me. I cornered him in the elevator and begged him not to make things difficult for Mr. Grant. He looked like he was about to cry and begged me to let him out first. That's when I realized he urgently needed the bathroom. I stepped aside immediately. Some things are more important than workplace justice. Later, Mr. Grant announced that bonuses were approved, plus extra rewards for top performers. He also mentioned the general manager hoped certain people would let this matter end quietly. I understood. Secrets would be kept. I messaged Megan that I was still employed. She sent a thumbs up and said she was jealous of both my boss and our friendship. Before the day ended, Mr. Grant called me into his office and handed me a bag of tea leaves for my dad. I told him I didn't think he knew my father. He hesitated and admitted my dad had contacted him earlier, worried I was being treated unfairly. I almost cried. Last year, my dad didn't even remember when I graduated. Now he was quietly handling things behind the scenes. When I got home, Dad was watching TV. I gave him the tea and told him everything was settled. He nodded and asked if I'd thought about the future. I told him I used to think talent mattered most, then connections, but now I figured even if I had nothing, at least I had family. He said parents couldn't protect their kids forever. Mom yelled from the kitchen that she absolutely could. I sat there listening to them argue and felt oddly content. We might be strangers but we're improving. The night everything went wrong started very casually. My ex-boyfriend Mark called me out of nowhere and asked if I'd lend him some money. He said he'd heard I got a big bonus. I asked him if this was another life-or-death emergency, or just a creative business idea. He laughed and said it was business, which somehow felt worse. We'd broken up peacefully, so we still talked once in a while. I asked how he even knew about my bonus. He admitted he didn't and said I was still as easy to trick as ever. I rolled my eyes but agreed to meet him for dinner. We met at a roadside barbecue stand the next night. Mark looked way too excited. He asked if my brother was around. That alone should have been a warning sign. I asked why he cared about Alex. He looked shocked and asked if I really didn't know. When I said no, he leaned in and whispered that back in high school, Alex once fought 40 people for me. I told him that was impossible. Alex barely talks to people, let alone 40 of them. Mark swore it was true and reminded me of a girl from our class who dated the school bully. I remembered her. He said that after I reported a teacher for taking bribes, that teacher's relatives wanted revenge. They spread rumors, blamed me, and arranged an ambush on my way home from school. Apparently, several vans full of guys with knives had been waiting. I stared at Mark and asked how he knew this. He said he'd been planning to ask me out back then, and happened to notice something was wrong. Everyone else was too scared to help, so he called the police. While waiting at the intersection to warn me, he ran into Alex. Mark said my brother looked terrifying. Like a god of death who hadn't slept in 1,000 years. He warned Alex that there were too many people, and that the police would arrive in 3 minutes. Alex had looked at him and said, very calmly, that 3 minutes was enough. According to Mark, Alex walked straight up to the vans and asked who was in charge. When the leader stepped out, Alex introduced himself and said I was his sister. He told them if they wanted to touch me, they'd have to go through him first. At this point, the people at nearby tables were openly listening in and cheering like they were at a live show. I paid for the food, transferred the money to Mark, and told him he should quit business and try stand-up comedy instead. As we walked away, Mark asked if things would have worked out if he'd fought harder back then when his parents disapproved of us. I smiled and told him that was ancient history. Right after that, he suddenly yanked me backward. Something shot out of the darkness. At first, I thought it was a snake. Then I realized it was a vine. The streetlights started exploding one by one. I immediately understood what the snakeman had been looking for. I asked the darkness if it was here to be neutered too. Mark screamed at me to stop joking and run. We ran toward the police station, but the vines were flipping cars like toys. I stopped and told Mark to go on without me. If I kept running, someone else would get hurt. He stayed anyway and admitted he was too out of shape to escape. His phone shattered. The shadows deepened. Just as a vine swung toward us, the air itself seemed to tear apart. Alex stepped out of the darkness. He walked toward the thing calmly, like this was a scheduled appointment. He told it he'd been expecting it. A voice asked who he was. Alex said he was the one who sent the snakeman to the Amazon, adjusted his genes, and made sure he only responded to specific signals. He said this creature was an invasive species, and hadn't reported its arrival. He raised his hand and said there was no option to return. Then he clenched his fist, and the vines collapsed into a tight ball like they were being crushed by invisible hands. For a moment, I saw glowing red eyes watching from far away. Alex held up 3 fingers. Mark whispered that maybe it meant 3 million intuition. Alex started counting down. 3, 2, 1. The next thing I knew, it was morning. I was late for work, but Dad had already called in for me. I messaged Alex and asked if he'd wiped my memory. He replied with a question mark and said we hadn't even met yesterday. I called Mark and asked if he remembered the vines. He said yes. I asked about the money. He said he didn't remember borrowing it and thanked me for the generous gift. I hung up. So everyone remembered. Alex was just pretending. Back at the scene, Alex watched as a cleanup crew quietly blurred the memories of the witnesses. He told them to leave me and Mark alone and just send us home. In the distance, Dad stood with a cup of tea, his red eyes fading as he watched Alex handle things. He sighed and said giving up was a bad habit. At home, Mom watched the street cameras and relaxed when she saw Dad give the okay sign. Buddy sat nearby reading a book and said that with the old man there, everything was fine. Mom said she just hoped there were no side effects for the kids. I got home safely. The next day, everything felt normal again. Dad went to work. Mom scrolled on her phone. Alex disappeared into his lab. Life went on. We still didn't talk much. We still didn't fully understand each other. But I realized something important. Even if we're strangers living under the same roof, when things go wrong, my family always shows up. And somehow, that's enough.